My name is Mike Shockley, and I serve as the Board Pension and Health Benefits Chair. I draw your attention to the workbook. The action items that we bring to you are on pages 8 through 11, and the written report follows on pages 42 to 46. We've had an active year, enhanced by the board support offered by Scott Brewer, our treasurer, Peggy Mai Hoover, our conference benefit officer, and Paula Whitbeck, our Westpath liaison. Individually and especially collectively, they enhance the work that we are able to accomplish. Within this past year, we again partnered with Westpath and the United Methodist Health Ministry Fund to sponsor Preparing for Your Future, a two-day seminar to prepare our retiring and soon-to-be retired clergy for the decisions they will face as they transition from active service. Decisions made leading up to and immediately following retirement have a substantial impact on the retirement years. We believe in this investment in the clergy that served the Great Plains Annual Conference, and as we had heard over and over as they were introduced earlier today, in this year's retirement class will continue to serve in retirement. While our workbook report shares what we've accomplished, we also have been following several developments. These are fluid items, and we are actively monitoring for developments. In Washington, legal challenges to the Affordable Care Act, as well as presidential executive orders on health insurance. Health insurance continues to be a topic of discussion, be that in the news, in tweets, or here at annual conference, and so we continue to monitor developments and seek contingencies should our current system become unavailable. General Conference 2019. If you watch the live feeds from GC 2019, as we heard from Oliver Green and Amy Lippold, the first items addressed at General Conference surrounded pensions. Our preference is working together and seeking common ground, but clearly, pension liability is a part of the discussion. My thanks to Scott, so I didn't have to go over what you just went over, by the way. Investment returns and in conjunction with investment committee. Our pre-82 funding levels are based on valuations on December 31st, 2017. The sell-off in December 2018 will be reflected in next year's reports and valuations. The December 2018 sell-off reminds me of 2008. In both cases, the market's rebound are masked as funding level is determined during a period of panic selling. Included in our action items is a slide titled Retirement Benefits Funding Percentage. We continue to have tension between maintaining adequate reserves to protect it from a sell-off like we just experienced and having too high of excess reserves. When we can, and when we feel it is prudent, we reduce the amounts billed to the local church by absorbing some of the annual pension liability from our reserves. Bishop, I submit our report, and I believe I'm ready to move to our action items as outlined on page 8.
Page 8.
With the commentary that the health allowance action item found on page 9, lines 1 through 8, is being deferred until tomorrow, and then we'll take those up again once the body addresses resolution 13.
Okay, so we're going to postpone that?
Postpone
Till we deal with a resolution. Okay.
Right.
All right.
So the first one is the past service rate. Past service rate is defined benefit based on the years of experience through December 31st, 1981. This rate has been received by those that have vested years of service in the pre-82 pension plan. The board set a projected goal of an annual increase of 2% or basically cost of living adjustment, which is reflected in the comprehensive funding plan. The 2019 PSR is $791. An increase of 2% or $16 for 2020 would bring the PSR up to $807. I should note that any increase to the annuity PSR shall be funded immediately in the year in which the increase occurs. So when we increase our cost of living, we immediately have to fund that increase.
All right, so the motion is before us. If you will approve an increase in the personal PSR,
Past service rate, yes.
of 2% for 2020, say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Thank you. The next item is the contingent annuity percentage. This is the rate of pension that surviving spouses shall receive from the pre-82 pension plan. The current rate is 85% for the former Kansas East and Nebraska conferences, and the rate for the former Kansas West conference is at 100%. We've set a goal to review those rates annually with the possibility of moving the rate to 100% for everyone. Once the amount is set at 100%, we can't go back down to 85, but we can bring the rest of these of them up. Unfortunately, the current funding level in the pre-82 pension plan will not allow for an increase at this time. However, that is something that the board is committed in looking at annually to see if we are at a point that we will be able to in the future.
So there's no action there.
I believe we do need an action to approve the PSR rate of,
2%.
well, no, you're
Yeah, we
correct.
already did that, but not for this one, correct?
You are correct.
You're just informed,
I'm
okay.
going to go back and sit down because,
You're good, you're doing great,
All right.
Mike, thank you.
Kelly, where are you?
Thank you, Mike, for your work.
The retirement funding, benefits funding percentage. The conference has maintained an overfunded position in the pre-82 pension plan and substantial pension reserves. The board funding plan for the pre-82 pension plan is not to be reduced below 120%. That gives us then the ability of when we have market changes, much like we did in 2018, decreasing the fund in the pre-82, but we've recommended to increase the CRISP defined benefit portion to the local church by 1% for 2020. The board will still be covering an additional 6.2% with any pre-82 pension funding over 120% and with pension reserves. That sounds really confusing, but there is a slide, I think, that shows that our CPP is shown at 3%. The CRISP defined for last year and this year is funded at 3% by the local church. Excuse me, I said the CRISP defined. It was actually the defined contribution. The defined benefit is increasing from 2% to 3%. And then there's a second page that speaking to members serving a quarter time. 25% of the appointment with local churches will fund 10% into the member's UMPIP account. The 2% balance required will be funded from pension reserves if needed. So that is a change from prior year. We're asking the local church to have 1% more.
Okay, so state your motion again. Motion is you're asking the local church to add 1% more.
So the funding will be CPP death and disability at 3%, CRISP defined contribution at 3%, and the CRISP defined benefit at 3%.
All right. If you would approve to, okay, microphone 4.
Andy Hargrove, Wellington, Kansas. Is your 120% overfunding based on the same actuarial tables that Scott was mentioned that were being used to develop the 110% overfunding? Or are you using a different formula, and if so, why?
Okay, so our funding level is established at, was it December 31st, 2017. Our goal is to remain at 120%. That's an internal preference that we've had maintained for an extreme period of time. I don't know that that's any different than what you're...
So the estimation of the actuarial liability between what I presented earlier and what Mike has spoken of here is indeed different. Westpath provides both of those calculations. They have historically provided both of those calculations. But what Mike is referring to is, as I referenced earlier in my breakneck speech, it is that previous discussion of funding as we've talked about in the past. Does that answer your question, Andy?
So then the question is, why aren't we using that same formula?
Because General Conference passed legislation that specifically says that the calculation of the actuarial liability must be upon the market basis.
I got that for that piece. I'm asking for why aren't we using that same formula for what we're talking about now?
In part because it's as long as we have churches that are active in a pension plan and that are actively supporting the liability of our retirees and our active pastors that have those accrued liabilities that we spoke of, there is no need to go to that market basis. The assumption is that, again, if a church leaves the denomination, they're no longer able to provide additional funding should we hit a recession and suddenly our funding levels are below our liability or our target levels for liability. And so that's what the big difference is between those two.
I'm not going to make a motion, but I would submit that we need to consider moving everything to the same actuarial tables instead of using ones that make us feel better.
I will tell you that Westpath provides those liability calculations to us, and they again are stipulated upon the basis of plan documents as well as legislation passed by the General Conference. So that piece, frankly, from my understanding, is outside of our prerogative.
Thank you, Scott.
Are there any other questions? All right, if you would adopt the recommendation to increase CRSP defined benefit from 2% 2019 to 3% in 2020, say aye. Opposed? No. Motion carries.
Okay. Finally, as I say, the one is being deferred until tomorrow. So we have a housing resolution in order to meet federal guidelines. An annual housing resolution must be approved at annual conference and printed in the journal. It is a very long resolution, and I don't have that in my notes. Do you need me to read that for you, or?
No.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. The housing resolution is on what page?
It should be 9.
Page 9, okay. Okay, here it is at the bottom. Are there any questions on the housing resolution? This needs to be approved at annual conference to meet federal guidelines. Are there any questions about this? All right, if you would approve the housing resolution, say aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries.